Diamond Dogs, and welcome to this spoiler review for season 3 of Ted Lasso, the back half. If you want to know what we thought about episodes 1 through 6, you could certainly watch that video that is up on the channel as well. But we're going to talk about episodes 7 through 12 and even touch on overall our thoughts on how this season finale / series finale went as well. But I am the Outlaw John Rocha, joined as always by my fellow geek buddy Shannon McClung. How are you, Shannon? How are you feeling?
You know, it's interesting in this week of finales where we had Succession, Barry, and Ted Lasso.
And
it's interesting
for some people. Yeah.
Oh, and Marvelous Mrs. Maisel. Yeah. I mean, Succession, I've only seen half of them. Like, I still haven't watched Barry yet. I've heard the response has been a little polarizing because my wife has kind of like been off the Barry train all this season. She's like, yeah, this is like, we're still watching it, but she's like, yeah, it's just not, this isn't for me. It's not funny anymore. It's really sad. But with this one, it seemed like what this show was at first season, second season, the excitement for the third season, it seems like a lot of that enthusiasm has just been sucked out. I mean, I feel like a lot of folks, and maybe I'm not actively searching for what people thought of it, but I feel like a lot of folks just aren't talking about it. Like it's just sort of as a topic, it's kind of come and gone. So, I certainly enjoyed a lot of the finale, but it's really interesting to see, like, the once mighty Ted Lasso is now like Ted who? Yeah. I mean, it seems like it's just kind of gone. Succession is the one that everybody talks about.
You're absolutely right. It's because it's the weightier show. It's the more prestigious show. And even though this show has won, awards through its history, Ted Lasso has, for acting and for show overall, it hasn't always been considered like on the level of something like Succession. And certainly season 1, pretty much overall, everybody really loved. Season 2, a little bit split, though more people seem to like it than less. And then this season has been a real interesting ride for it. But I think I unlocked it, Shannon, because I waited until all the episodes dropped to watch them in a binge over 2 days. And I think that's the way you need to watch Ted Lasso. You stay in that world. You stay in the mood of that world. You stay with these characters. You're tied into it like a soap opera, right? You want to watch them back to back to find out what's happening with all these characters. And you don't lose the through lines as much or get affected by your world in the week before each episode premieres. So you're thrown off the rhythm. And I kind of like that. And look, there are many ways to consume shows nowadays with so many different types of shows out there and so many different ways to watch them. And I have to say, I started out the first 2 episodes feeling this kind of weird, kind of hate watching vibe coming over me. And then out of nowhere, the charm of the show grabbed me again and took me through the last 4 episodes. And I thoroughly enjoyed it. It doesn't mean that I don't have my issues with a couple of the storylines and story beats, but overall, it went back to be what the show is, which is a show that's supposed to inspire you, make you believe in things, give you hope. Is it real? Is it put on? Is it corny at times? Is it fake sometimes? Does it not deal with the realities of having a gay teammate and how that would be headline news for weeks and possibly affect the team's chemistry? Does it not deal with some of these other weightier issues that were going on, like with Sam and his life and the attacks for him speaking out? Does it touch on things and then move away from them? Yes, but that's not what the show's supposed to be, right? It's not Succession. It's much more about like, look, there's a possibility, there's hope. And in a world full of so much hope dissipating, I think it's not a bad thing to have a show like this, but we are going to review it. So we're going to analyze it and break it down here on this series. So on this review rather. So Shannon, let's just jump into it. Overall, what are your thoughts on, let's start with Ted. How do you feel the Ted situation was handled over the back half of the season? We have Dr. Jacob coming to visit. We see Ted grappling with the fact that he is now surrendering a little bit of space for Jacob, and Ted's having to confront some things, his panic attacks. His mom comes in to visit, issues with Nate, and then issues a little bit with Rebecca. And then by the end, he's told Rebecca he is leaving. He's going back home. And we can tell that because Jacob's out of the picture and they had that little bit of exchange, him and his ex-wife, that maybe him reuniting with his wife is back on the horizon. So what are your thoughts about how Ted Lasso ended up by the end of the season, the character himself?
You know, I think that's kind of what was missing in the season is
Mm.
first two seasons, while the show was very much about AFC Richmond
Yeah,
and
yeah,
players and Rebecca. I think Ted's story is really what propelled it forward. Sort of like the first season was this fish out of water
yeah.
comedy that had a lot of heart. The second season was him sort of grappling with his mental health.
Yeah,
And I
yeah.
think the addition of Sarah Niles in season two, um, it was just such a huge asset to the
Yeah.
show. And I think her absence in season three was really felt because Ted, we sort of dealt with a little bit of
Yeah,
the
yeah,
panic attacks. It was more about the fact that he wasn't really a presence in his son's life and seeing how his former marriage counselor had you know kind of slipped in to his ex-wife's DMs and had sort of like not supplanting him, but was becoming sort of the male figure in his son's life. And how it's like, look, I mean, I think she had Dr. Sharon had the best one of the best lines. I can't remember if it was in season one or season two or at the beginning of this season, because she did pop up at the beginning of the season, just saying basically like, it's okay. Like I know you don't quit. Sometimes that's okay.
Yeah.
And I feel like that was something that they did not consistently get through. I think that's a lot of what season three was missing, was that big story. It didn't feel like it didn't feel like the machine ever really kind of got going because you were with a different player every week. And all of those individual stories were great. But I think what was missing was Ted's recurring story. I mean, Ted at some points in the season felt like a footnote.
Okay.
Like we did get I really did like the episode with his mom. And I feel like something like that should have been spread out over the season.
Interesting point.
So while I did think it ended where it was supposed to end. Like he was always going to leave. And him sort of, you know, reuniting with his ex-wife, at least, you know, just to meet up with them. I thought that was where it needed to get to. But I think what happened in between, for me, probably the writing, they kind of dropped the ball a little bit.
Okay. Do you think they went a little meta? You know how Jamie is like saying with the Total Football, you guys expect me to lead. You think why don't you go through me? Do you think the writers were kind of saying, we're doing this with Ted? We're turning the series this season rather into Total Football season, where everybody is getting a chance to kick the ball and be the center and be the focus. And Ted is more the facilitator because Ted has been more of the central figure in the first 2.5 seasons. Cause I think he was a central figure in the first half of the season, but certainly receded a little bit. I agree with you, receded a little bit in the back half of the season and kind of letting other people take the shine, other people get the attention and what have you. I wonder if maybe that was their approach in a subtle way. And clearly it didn't 100% work for you. So I can respect that.
I can say if that was the intention for me as an audience member, it did not get executed to its fullest potential.
That's understood. Totally,
because again, like everything that we got individually, I thought was really, really great. I loved Sam's episodes.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah.
You know, I loved the back and forth between Danny Rojas and Van Damme. I thought that whole episode was so funny. And I thought that was like a nice recurring bit throughout the last half of the season, where Van Damme is so scared of Danny Rojas. I thought that was so funny, but it just didn't quite come together for me, at least. Like again, I imagine there are some folks who really did enjoy it. But yeah, it just didn't quite land for me.
I like that we turned down the corniness on Ted a little bit in the season, and we had him more kind of trying to figure out how to help everybody else get to where they were going. And I agree with you. The mom's episode was great. I thought it was going to be a little like, oh, platitudes, and it was real unsettling to have him curse out his mom in that back and forth at the end, but clearly unleashing more of the stuff that's been working for him. So maybe more scenes where he was really confronting himself. You know, we had Rebecca looking at herself in the mirror and being the young girl again. We had Nate look at himself in the mirror, not spit this time, thank God, as he got the courage to ask the hostess out from the Greek place and you know, walk down that path, which we'll get to in a little bit. But so maybe something more with Ted, where he's seeing himself in the mirror and looking at himself and having a little more, because we had that. And when he was brushing his teeth earlier in the season, I think he had those moments where he was having to have the fear. Maybe a little more of that might have worked, but I actually didn't mind that he receded back, but I totally respect where you were coming from, maybe getting a bit more. I also think the Sudeikis stuff was a little weird going on in his world and everything, and the fudging of the lines, the blurring of the lines a little bit was weird as I was watching the show as well. How much of this is Jason Sudeikis? How much of this is Ted Lasso and what have you? But let's move on to Nate. Shannon, what were your thoughts on how they handled Nate? Because this is my biggest criticism of this season is how they handled Nate. Nick Mohammed, fantastic actor, really bringing a lot of levels to Nate in the moments that he could have. In the back half of the season, we see him, engaging and jumping in this relationship. We see his girlfriend really trying to be the one that tells him, hey, why don't you celebrate your victories? You're so consumed with what's next, and you're so consumed with falling up. The next time you're going to fall apart or fail, you don't have time to enjoy your victory. Certainly, it's something my girlfriend tells me all the time. Enjoy good things that are happening. Don't focus on the next thing that's going to happen, the next bad thing that's going to happen. And then we have this coming together with his father after his mom shows him the map of how how his father asked his mom out, which was really a sweet moment. And then Nate has the moment with Coach Beard, and then Nate has the moment with the guys coming in and asking to come back. And then Nate has the moment where he apologizes to Ted and really breaks down, and he's back to being a part of the team there just before the last game. So how did you feel about how things were handled with Nate here in the season overall, and certainly in the last 6 episodes?
In terms of his sort of emotional character arc, I thought it was great. I really, really liked it. It was the story beats that I'm like, okay, we are really pushing the bounds of plausibility now, in that you had the equipment manager in season 1, becomes an assistant coach, becomes a head coach. Now, again, I don't know a ton about European football, but that seems like such a stretch. And then by the time he is then the assistant equipment manager, it's like, okay, like I think there was a way to do this. I think that there was a way to keep all those big character beats that you wanted and still keep him as that head coach. Like him as the head coach, I really liked. And I know we had talked about prior to the season that it was being set up as this big, Ted versus Nate showdown, which we, they played once and Nate won. And so
Nate is 1-0 against Ted. He is 1-0 against Ted.
I mean,
final game. So
I mean, I will say the security footage of him ripping the sign apart and then hiding under the desk, I thought that was so funny. But I think there was a way without him pushing back against Rupert and still keeping that position. Like Rupert, like, I know we'll get to him, but as a character, it's like, man, this guy's he's all over the place. Like
Rupert is just anger.
We knew he was, the antagonist for, since season 1, but it got pushed so far. Like, okay, like I like the fact that he's showing Nate kind of the dark side, and he's, showing him with, companions who maybe bought and paid for maybe. For a time. Like, I'm like, great.
Certainly,
this is not a good guy. This is, this is, he would try to maybe sabotage Nate's relationship.
100%.
But I do think there was a way, I don't know, in my head, I'm like, AFC get knocked out, not by their own doing. Like they have a great season, but the Cards just didn't fall their way. And Nate goes on to, keep coaching, and maybe he quits, and that's more of a thing. But it was just so difficult to swallow. Like, okay, he's a head coach. Now he's a waiter at the Taste of Athens, and now he's the assistant. Again, where we got emotionally with him, I thought that's what needed to happen. But the specific beats, that was difficult for me to wrap my head around.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you. I think they really fumbled the ball out of bounds, so lose a term. I think they just messed that up completely, because just like with Jamie, which we'll get to, is the most fully realized character arc of everybody in the show. Everybody in the show over 3 seasons. I think it's the MVP character arc. But with Nate, there was a chance here at the beginning of the season to have him be so villainous, so angry, so frustrated, and then still make him sympathetic, because we're seeing a guy who was in a bit of an arrested development, because, as we saw in the conversation with his father, his father rode him so hard. He didn't understand how to raise a sensitive, intelligent child. Look, I had those issues with my dad. I was a sensitive kid growing up. My father was more about like hammering things home and beating me up and all those kinds of things. It was from a good place, trying to toughen me up for the world because of what he'd experienced, but it ends up kind of fucking you up. So you have to do your therapy to climb out that kind of stuff. And I think they didn't do enough to kind of really dial into the evilness of Nate, having him messing with it, going to the association, the FA, and messing with Ted and talking to referees and trying to really poison the well, so that there comes a moment where he really sees that he has become the horrible version of himself that he never wanted to become, the darkest timeline, and then does the work of climbing back out, maybe losing the girlfriend, and does the work of finally realizing, I need to take care of myself because I need to figure out what's wrong with me and then make amends to everybody. And I think that would have been a stronger character arc. And look, Nick Mohammed, as you said, did a wonderful job conveying the emotional journey that this character was on, but the writing at times and the story beats let him down overall as a character, because by the end, he shouldn't be the assistant to the equipment manager. That is way too low for a guy of this intelligence. He should absolutely be an assistant coach. I don't give a fuck about Coach Beard or Coach Roy Kent or anything. Nate is smarter than both of them put together. And so he should have been brought back in as an assistant coach and given advice. And they used his play, but that should have been a thing where he is making amends, making restitution. And Ted suggests that play to Nate. Do you mind if we run it? And Nate goes, yeah, here's how you run it. And that would have been, I think, a better way to go about it. I did enjoy the Coach Beard having that moment. It was great acting there with Nate, and really surrendering what happened in his past to him. And then what we saw later with Nate having those moments with his dad, which I think could have been a little bit more fleshed out, because his father was a prick. And so to have him all of a sudden have this moment where he loves his son, we should have gotten there through an argument. That would have made more sense. That's more logical sense than him just walking in, playing violin and being moved by that. I think that would have made more logical sense. So there was more emotional territory to explore here that they didn't 100% explore. So that the end, it's still nice what happens with Nate, but yeah, you do feel uncomfortable that they kind of bitched him out to be all the way down to assisting the equipment manager. I didn't like that at all myself. So I agree with you for sure, Shannon. Let's
I could. Yeah, sorry. I was gonna say I could almost see like they keep it the same way that he does leave West Ham, and maybe he's there at the game watching, and Ted talks to him. Like, you know, AFC's getting their lunch eaten, and Ted talks to him in between, and he's like, well, if you wanted to do this, you could try this. If you want to do this, you could try this. Like you have him as an active participant without busting him down all the way to assistant equipment manager. Right.
Because I'm sure that's not what she was meaning when she said he had to go back to Richmond. And he was sitting there like making notes and doing all these kinds of things. That's not what an equipment manager does. You're you know, that's something what an intelligent tactician would do. And so, and yeah, some of you might be saying, well, his dad wanted him to be happy. Maybe he's happy just doing that. No, he would not be happy without his intelligence coming through. And there's a way to have his intelligence come through, and he's done the emotional work to be a better overall coach. That's why I think it was a bit of a letdown that Roy became coach. I thought it was going to be Nate. I thought that would have been the smarter move, a second chance. All these guys are still his assistants, and they learn under Nate. Ted goes back across the sea. That just would have made more sense to me overall with Nate. But of course, Nick Mohammed still did a wonderful job acting with the material they gave him, for sure. Let's move on to Jamie Tart here. As I said, the most fully realized, in my opinion, character arc throughout this whole thing. How do you feel about how they handled Jamie in the back half of the season? We're seeing him, understanding how to finally implement total football to help the whole team. Let's set aside tying strings around your penises. Good God, what the fuck? But like, let's move on to this idea of what he figured out. He finally figured out. He unlocked total football for everybody, and they were to make, by the way, completely unbelievable. It would never fucking happen. It would never fucking work. But it was fun to see in a fantasy story like this that it could possibly work. But Jamie unlocking it, and then Jamie having his journey here with Keeley throughout this whole thing, going home to see his mom after he's having the yips in essence and worried about stuff, confronting what's going on with his dad. We find out about his dad, though. We do see that, but we never see that the moment before the game that could have maybe cemented something maybe at halftime or something. But and then we had the weird thing with him and Roy having a fight over Keeley, which I thought was a weird decision because like these guys had been growing. Why would they all of a sudden resort to fighting each other over Keeley? No way either of them, with the journey you took us on, would have made this decision. But by the end, he's a much more well-rounded guy, a much more aware guy. But they still maintained who he was throughout, still with the Axe body spray or whatever, and still with the literature in his thing. But certainly some sweet moments. He apologized to Keeley when all that stuff went down about the video that gets out there. So what did you think about how Jamie was handled throughout this back half of the season?
I think you said it pretty perfectly, that in terms of the 3 seasons of the show, Jamie has the most dynamic and most satisfying arc.
Yeah.
That he starts off as this young hotshot who's not a good guy. It's right. You know, it's like the 24-year-old millionaire. How you don't want to give that to a person that young because they don't know how to handle it. To his sort of his story in the second season where he has to come back to Richmond kind of with his tail between his legs. You see the work that he has to do with his teammates. You get the great introduction of his relationship, his new relationship with Roy through his relationship with his dad. Like you see what a bad guy, what a guy who needs some work as his dad. It needs a lot of work. Love the Jamie Roy mentorship, how Roy took him under his wing and shows him like them biking through Holland. I was like, oh, this is such a delight. And it seemed like it was kind of headed to this like love triangle with Keeley that I do think for the two of them and for Keeley, I mean, it really kind of cut their legs out from under them, that they would put them in this position that, yes, they essentially, I think them having a fist fight over something is actually kind of funny. The fact over it's, hey, who gets to be with this woman? I was like, that kind of sucks for them. And it kind of sucks for Keeley because Keeley didn't have a whole lot to do in the finale. I mean, you know, we had her publicity company. We had her relationship with Jack, which fell apart. And then she sort of resorted to just kind of being, you know, the female object of affection. And granted, like we get something nice with her and Rebecca, like the Richmond women's team. But it just puts such a kind of bad cherry on a great Sunday because Jamie's evolution was just so good, and Phil Dunbar did such a good job. I mean, he really was kind of like a Jamie Lannister character, like, oh, what a prick at the beginning, and by the end you're like, oh man, let me give you a hug.
Phil Dunster, exactly.
Oh, Phil Dunster, excuse me. Did I say Phil Dunbar?
I just wanted to let you finish your point before I corrected you.
It's the wrong last syllable, but it's a really important syllable.
Dunbar, mate.
I think I called Sarah Niles Sharon Niles, Dr. Sharon, played by Sarah Niles. Fair point. But yeah, I mean, I loved the character. I loved where they almost ended up. My wife and I, she was just like, who did she pick? Who did she end up with? I'm like, it doesn't matter, but also it doesn't look like either of them.
It looks like she could choose both of them if she wanted to, or none of them. It's kind of left up to her, which is progressive to get to, but having them resort to Neanderthal moments, a moment in Neanderthal, it just doesn't make sense. It really didn't make sense. I thought it was like you. I thought it was a betrayal to both the characters, especially because we'd had such this. I mean, that scene at his house with his mom, and you know, seeing the posters, I think is really awesome. And seeing him really kind of surrendering himself to his mother and speaking, and she's like holding him, and she's not like holding him like you would a child that's like, how can I say that their shit don't stink? She's more holding him like she senses that there's something really wrong. And so she's using what she's always used with him to get him to talk. And it really humanized him even more. And I thought that was a nice moment. So to have him have this fight with Roy over Keeley just seemed kind of shoehorned in rather than organically worked towards, where you would feel like, oh no, why are they doing this, rather than, oh no, like, why are they doing this? You know, there's two.
Yeah, it just felt reductive for all three characters.
100%.
And when they are in, it's Man City, right? That's the light blue. Okay,
yes,
yeah.
Yes.
So when they're in Man City and you see Jamie's dad's two buddies in the stands, for a moment, I'm kind of like, oh no, he's dead.
Yeah, I thought so too. I thought, did the actor die? What happened? Oh shit!
Then you see that he's in rehab, and like it is a bit of a leap.
Yeah,
that our last shot with Jamie is like, it's a great last shot, but it's sort of like, oh, okay. So yeah, you've made amends with your father. Okay, good. You've forgiven your dad for his, for his past transgressions.
Sure.
It would have been nice to have a little bit of a launch pad to that, but ultimately it was nice.
Yeah, agreed. Let's hit Roy Kent, and you already kind of spoke about Keeley a little bit already, but let's hit Roy and Keeley here. Roy going through his own things, trying to figure out, what's going on with him, and he makes numerous mistakes with Keeley in the last 6 episodes. We already talked about one of them, but also him asking who the video was for. That was Juno Temple did a wonderful job acting that moment. Like, you just really felt this, like, oh, why did you do that, man? And her really kind of hurt, but also understanding like that men have hurt her many times like this in the past. So she's kind of quietly hurt by someone she really respects, resorting to this kind of generalized tactic that men sometimes have, that jealousy and ego that rears its ugly head sometimes. And so I thought, you're right. I thought they kind of played her in a certain way. She's had this stuff with Jack as well, which seemed a little weird the way it all ended. And she was ghosted after she'd been so supportive. They put out the video, which I understand that. Certainly the fappening is a thing that happened. And certainly it's happened a number of times. And female celebrities have been targeted mostly for this kind of stuff. So you see her grappling with that, and then eventually it all works out because Rebecca's willing to fund her adventures. But also with Roy, we see him grow with the Jamie relationship, but we see him give that letter to Keeley and come across the bridge here. We see him want to become a diamond dog by the end. I love the moments where he's like, oh, I hate what you turned me into. I've had that interaction with Vogel before. So those are great moments throughout the back half. So although Keeley kind of was pushed back in the finale, I do think we got to, kind of dive into her storyline a bit more with Jack, and then with everything working out with her and Rebecca. And we see her getting really emotional and kind of broken for a bit after everything gets taken away from her, and then find her way back to it. So what did you think about Roy and Keeley as they navigated this last 6 episodes?
I mean, Roy Kent, he's a great character. And Brett Goldstein does a great job playing him. The strongest part was his relationship with Jamie. Watching that mentorship happen, and like these two rivals end up becoming friends, and then basically becoming like brothers. And it was just beautiful to watch. Keeley, I really liked Keeley's storyline. Jack, I could take it or leave it. Like, you could kind of see where it was going to go. Like, she's not going to end up with her. Like, it was fine. I like that. I like that actress from For All Mankind, whose name is escaping me. But Keeley just got the short shrift by the end. It was just really just kind of a bummer. I loved her dynamic with her CFO. I thought that was
Barbara. Yes, with Barbara. Yes.
Yeah, I thought that was such a fun relationship. Agreed. How again it was a little antagonistic, and then by the end, like when it's like, okay, we're shutting up shop, and Barbara ends up respecting what Keeley does.
Yeah, and what she's
like, okay. Yeah, what she built, how she approaches business.
Right.
So I actually like that. I mean, the whole thing with the snow globes, like once she realized, like, oh well, I have to buy it. So
that was weird.
I thought that was a fun little character quirk. But again, like with Jamie, I mean, that last beat just kind of took the wind out of my sails a little bit, despite the fact that I do think Juno Temple and Brett Goldstein both did tremendous work this season. He is so funny. And for folks who haven't seen Juno Temple in much else, I mean, I imagine this is where a lot of folks in the States found her. Right. Again, there's a great series on Paramount Plus called The Offer about the making of The Godfather, where she's in it, and she's just awesome.
agreed. Yeah, I would have liked to have seen a little bit more with Keely there, but I do like the idea of the spinoff. If they do a spinoff of Rebecca and Keely owning a women's team, I think that's awesome. The Women's Super League in England has been blowing up. I follow the Liverpool ladies and watch their stuff on YouTube, their games on YouTube. And Chelsea's really the big team there now in terms of the Women's Super League. They just won the championship with Sam Kerr. Though that would be fun to explore that as kind of a spin-off of Ted Lasso when we're following Rebecca and Keely. I don't know what you call that, but it would be interesting, especially because women's soccer is blowing up here in the U.S. Finally, after multiple attempts. We had the Angel City documentary. It's out on HBO Max. We've seen the women fight for equal pay. And we just recently had in Barcelona and other cities like the largest attendance ever for women's football games for a league game. It wasn't the World Cup, which had usually been the thing. It was league games going on there with the Barcelona women's team. So it's blowing up on the women. And even on the FIFA, there are now multiple years of leagues of women that you can play. So I think it would be a smart move if they were going to spin anything off of this, of Ted Lasso, to see Rebecca and Keely and maybe even Jamie and Roy as like guest stars every once in a while. I think would be awesome to explore as a possibility, and maybe kind of make it up to Juno to give her a little bit more of this character to explore as well. Well, let's take a quick break, Shannon, before we get into the last parts of our review, and then we'll get on out of here after that, right after this.
Do 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 do. Do 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 do. That's what I was expecting to hear.
All right, let's deal with the team overall. How did you feel the Sam situation with Okofu? I think his name was the Sam Richardson character, which was played so well, by the way. That whole really unsettling situation with him, and of course him throwing all the garbage, or all the food rather, on all the owners when they wouldn't go into what was a version of the European Super League, which actually happened last year. That whole drama really did happen in real life. That was a version of it that they were showing you, and it caused all kinds of drama and controversy across the world. So, yeah, what did you think about that? And then with Danny, as you said, with Danny and Van Damme, also a little bit more furthering of the storylines with the other characters here, with Danny Rojas and him exploring a little bit more of being a part of this whole thing, being a part of the total football, also the stuff with Colin and his homosexuality. How did you feel about all the stuff with the team? And of course, the captain as well, what he was going through in the issues with Colin, not being more, with Isaac not feeling like Colin came to him and told him this ahead of time about him being gay. So what did you think about the team storylines that course through the back half of this season?
I mean, Sam is obviously the star here, and it's a storyline that I wish we would have seen more throughout. You know, chop it up and disperse it throughout the season.
Yeah.
I love the fact that Nonso Anansi played his dad.
Yeah. Oh my God.
who is like he is like, I wouldn't think of him as like old enough to be Sam's dad, but I guess he is in his 50s, and Toheeb Jamo is like not 30 yet. I
don't think so. Yeah.
But Sam's stories were the best.
Yeah.
I do think like they did a little bit of a disservice to the Sam and Rebecca storyline from season 2, and that it was kind of touched on. Like you see that, you know, they have a couple of brief exchanges, but they kind of just let that go, which it's like, okay, if a relationship ends, you know, that is what happens. But I think I would have liked to have seen just a little bit more with that. Love the fact, like when the players come and after the restaurant has been vandalized, when his father's there, that's one of those Ted Lasso heartwarming moments where you see where the team starts in season 1 and how they have become this family. It's just so nice. A lot of like the big team storylines, like, all right, what are we gonna do while we're out? And they end up just staying in the hotel together. Right, I thought that was so much fun. Danny Rojas, I wish we would have given him a story. Cristo Fernandez is such a joyous performer to watch. That, I mean, again, I'm saying like, it was so fragmented and like nothing really connected. That being said, I still wanted more from him. I thought the Colin Trent little arc that we had, I thought that was great. We really got to see the struggle that a professional athlete might have in a situation like that. And of course, that type of situation isn't relegated to professional sports. Like it's anything. It's your family, it's your friends. I mean, it's where you come to this decision of like, am I going to tell people who I actually am?
Yeah.
And the stress and the challenges that go along with that.
Yeah.
So that moment where with Isaac, like I never thought like, all right, Isaac's not going to be homophobic. Like,
right.
It is going to be more of a, why didn't you tell me?
Yeah.
Isaac is another one. Like, he had a little bit of a story in season 2. I wouldn't have minded a little bit more given to Isaac. His big moment at the end in the finale where he kicks the ball through the net.
Through the net.
That is awesome. Like, it's so funny that Jamie gives the ball to Danny gives the ball to Isaac. Like, I was really hoping the commentators were like, they do know that someone has to kick the ball.
Yeah, right. Arlo. By the way, hidden MVP of the show, Arlo White. Just him and oh god, I can't remember the other guy. They're back and forths. Really funny, man. Really
funny. Because you said they're commentators.
Yes,
right.
Yeah, Arlo was a commentator for NBC Sports for a very long time for the Premier League. He's moved on to be the main commentator for LIV Golf, which I'm not happy about, but I love Arlo, so I'm never gonna begrudge the guy. But he was so good in this, yeah, for sure.
It's always funny hearing someone who uses their voice as a profession, but they're not a performer.
Yeah,
hearing them read scripted dialogue. It's always because there's just a slight awkwardness.
Oh yeah,
but it's so effective, and I think it actually turns up the comedy on it. It's just really, really funny. So overall, like the teams, like I really like Jan Moss. Like Jan Moss is a character. I'm like, oh, you're funny to come in with a line here. The one French guy, it's funny to hear him say a line.
Yeah.
But I do wish we would have gotten maybe something with Danny and something with Isaac.
And I think this is where my biggest criticism comes, and I'll address it. As a Latino watching the show, especially as a Latino who's worshipped at the altar of football/soccer since he was a kid, and watched and gone to see. And there are so many fantastic Latino players with interesting personalities, interesting stories that have coursed throughout numerous leagues in Europe and America for decades. And so to have Danny represent that, but be the smiley, happy guy who's the butt of jokes sometimes, or who's like got this obsession with the Zlatan Ibrahimovic character that they bring in, the striker that they bring, says, I don't want to get hurt again. Oh, give me 2 shirts. I know he's funny, and he's so funny when he makes the change to play for the Mexican national team. And as a guy who has watched the Americans play the Mexican national team for decades, that made logical sense to me, that he become a total utter a-hole to be focused to defend his country, because the Mexican teams are very proud players who fight for their country when they're on that field. And so it's totally believable that he would make that switch within the comic constructs of Ted Lasso. But I would have liked to have seen more from him. Same thing with Isaac, more of the storyline, more flesh. Jamie got such an incredible arc. Why can't these characters of color get the same kinds of incredible arcs? And it really frustrated me that they painted his chef, Sam Chef, as this angry black person who was upset about, and it was Sam who had to tweet it out and deal with that, but then they never revisited it. So to me, that was super frustrating to see these things that were commentaries by all white creators about these characters of color and not fleshing them out. I get it. Maybe as an all white creator, you're like, you know what? I don't know much about the Latino heritage and story of soccer players or football players, or I don't know much about the black story, but I can tell the African thing a little bit here with Sam. But you make Sam such a smiley, happy guy. And I get it. His father, great exchange. He says, what does he say? Don't fight forward, not fight back, or fight against, fight forward. I thought that was an interesting piece of advice for a father to give that I think really could work in certain situations. So I like that, but there needed to be more, man. I would love these characters of color like Isaac and Sam and Danny to have gotten much more conflict, much more to overcome, much more past a restaurant that's been vandalized. There was more, or Danny with more. Where's his family? What does his family think about him playing? What does his family think about him winning? Where is that with Danny? There is so much here that could have played. Do the players don't like that he plays for a British team? That happens when you leave a Latin country to go play for another team in another country. Sometimes the Latin players are offended by that when you leave. So there's stuff here that they could have explored culturally that I think would have been really interesting to explore, especially Isaac. What's it like to be a black football player when the racism is so rampant in English football now and in European football? I mean, we just had that situation with Vinicius Jr. with Real Madrid having those issues, stopping a match to call out a fan who was calling him offensive, negative stereotypes about him being black. So there was stuff that could have been explored here, I think, a little bit more. And I know in the construct of Ted Lasso, it's softer approaches to these harder issues, but at least there would have been something to flesh these characters out. So I will ding these white creators and writers, mostly white writers, for not exploring this more or not bringing in more people of color to be contributors to handle these storylines. We just had that Vanity Fair article, Harold Perrineau speaking very honestly about how frustrating it was to have two white showrunners not understand the cultural implications of a black storyline and what you were doing with the characters of a black storyline. So I would have liked to have seen more. So in that way, I do agree with you, Shannon. I think I go a little farther than you do, but I do agree with you 100% sensing that.
Looking at storylines that maybe we didn't need, like the whole Zava thing, I was like, we didn't need this. Mm-hmm. I mean, you know, I understand that I guess is a thing in football, is like you get this incredible player who is able to, you know, kind of turn the tides, but ultimately it didn't get us anywhere. I mean, you can make the argument that because of Zava leaving, Ted had to up his game, and that's when he has that vision and that American restaurant. It's like, okay,
you still could have gotten there with a losing streak. You still could have gotten there with a losing streak. Yeah.
And I think that frees up, because Zava was in at least 2 episodes. I want to say maybe 3, but maybe it's just 2. But that frees up some story real estate to focus on. Again, the whole thing with Danny, the idea that you had, I'm like, that's a great idea. I mean, it's too bad that we didn't get to see that. Like there were some funny moments, but ultimately it's like the whole Zava thing, for me at least, like it doesn't get us anywhere. Like use that real estate a little more judiciously.
Yeah, as someone who is such a massive fan of football, soccer, knows its history, you could tell that there were moments where certain creators who have just come to the game or come to the game recently over the last couple of decades were showing off their knowledge rather than making it organic. And I think Zava was one of those examples of that. Whereas the Total Football thing, I think, was great. That was Brendan Hunt, who plays Coach Beard, presenting Total Football. That was awesome. For people who don't know Total Football, the way that was presented in the show, I thought worked so well. But the Zava thing was like, let's make an allusion to things for those insiders about football a bit. But you're right. It took real estate that could have been given to the other characters of color. Once again, that's a white character coming in. I think there's just negativity around that in my mind about it, that there were opportunities that were dropped here or that weren't explored and could have been. Let's finish up by talking about Rebecca. What did you think about how Rebecca progressed through here, finding her strength against Rupert, stopping the Super League from happening with Akufu, and also resisting Rupert and having that moment of forgiveness with Rupert before Rupert tries to kiss her and she has to hold her back. And then even the sympathy she felt watching Rupert go down there, push his coach, his former coach, or the new coach that was the former coach, and him hobbling off being called a wanker by the Richmond fans. And then by the end, she is she's going to buy a women's league, or women's team rather, with Keeley. So what did you think about how they handled Rebecca throughout? And then, of course, reunited with randomly with the Dutch guy and his daughter. So,
Hannah Waddingham is just one of those delightful performers 100%. To watch. Like, I did not know, watching Game of Thrones, what was it, season 5? That would, like, I didn't make that connection. No, that the Shame Nun is now the owner of the team. So I would imagine for most American audiences, for most of the American audience, that this was their introduction to her. And she was just delightful. And again, she had such a wonderful arc. I actually liked where we started the season with her, where they've been promoted. Yeah. There is this pressure now to perform, and that need to win kind of gets the better of her. Yeah. And you see her, kind of getting in bed with her, worser angels. But then the episode where they're in Netherlands and that scene on the boat with the Dutch guy, I mean, that was just so lovely.
It was fantastic.
And the kind of silly, you know, going to her mom's psychic or fortune teller, whatever the woman was. And, you know, you get these, it's like they start with that, like, you know, putting out those little signs, but then they kind of went away from it. So it's like, I think across the board, the writing was just not what it has been in the seasons past. They just did not have a strong, in my opinion, a strong showrunner or story editor to really keep an eye on, like, okay, we're going to hit this, but don't forget this. Don't forget this. And with these longer run times, like there's no reason that you couldn't have done it in my opinion. And again, I have only been a writer. I have never been a story editor or anything like that. But it seems like you have this space. There is time to hit these things, because otherwise it seems like you start with something and then you just kind of abandon it. And then when it comes back, it's like, oh, is that back? As an audience, I've kind of checked out here. Like, I don't remember everything about this. So, but as a performance, she was wonderful. And seeing that, you know, moment with, you know, her you know, reuniting with the Dutch boatman, who turns out he's a Dutch boat plane man. Like, awesome. Like that was a very, very nice, that was a nice bow on her story.
I liked Rebecca's performance as well, and I thought the moments where she found her strength to stand up to Rupert, to finally break free of Rupert's hold on her overall, because as you said, they start out the season with this pressure that she has to win because she wants to get back at Rupert. She goes down and yells at Ted when he loses to West Ham at that halftime. She wants to yell at him, but she's trying to encourage him and support him, and so you have those moments. But you see, and they have a beautiful exchange, her and Ted, out in the stands there in the last episode, having the conversation about him leaving, and she's ready to have that conversation. She tries to encourage him to stay. You know, so there was a lot of active stuff for Rebecca to be involved in. But in the end, they kind of went the route that they went, which I kind of like the ending, but I would like to have seen some more with Rebecca for sure, beyond just the finding the strength of it all and stumbling into the guy. What is the more of the emotional journey that she's going on to get her to this place? We have the scene with her in the mirror, which I think is really awesome. And then her, you know, calling them out in the meeting and causing Akufu to apparently throw food on all of them. But then what more do we have after the Rupert? I wanted something more to kind of maybe finish things out. But overall, as you said, Hannah did a wonderful job. All right, well, let's wrap up here with our final thoughts. Shannon, I think we're bidding a goodbye to Ted Lasso. So your thoughts on this overall season and the series here as we wrap up the show?
Well, I mean, you know, I feel like those first two seasons were so strong. I was talking about this with some friends yesterday. Those first two seasons were so strong because they were made before that gigantic wave of love and affection from the audience happened. Like, they were already, I think when season one was dropping, they were already in the midst of making season two. And season three is kind of the situation where you see when expectations are placed on you. Like, also, you know, again, I can't confirm this, but like Bill Lawrence was not as involved with season three.
That's what we hear. Yes.
That he was over working on Shrinking while Sudeikis and company took over Ted Lasso. And I think that's, you feel the absence of an experienced showrunner who knows, like, don't forget this, don't forget that. Like, these are the things we need to, these are the things, you know, little moments that we need to sprinkle in here and there so the audience doesn't forget this great character and their great storyline. I feel like the finale was kind of like season three across the board was sort of a heartfelt car wreck.
That's a great description, man.
Just because the characters, we have grown to love them. They are so much fun. The actors do such a great job. So anything that we're getting from them, like, we're happy. Like, all of the individual storylines that we got were great. Things just didn't quite fit together the way that they did, especially in season one, but even in season two. I mean, season two, as you said, has kind of some ups and downs. But also, just the absence of Bill Lawrence and Sarah Niles. I thought Sarah Niles was a character. It's like, figure out a way to bring her in, because she was just such a fun, she had such a fun dynamic with everyone to play off of. So overall, like, I think Ted Lasso is like a lot of shows that just come out of the gate screaming and kind of are going away with, you know, I don't want to say with a whimper, but not exiting the way that they entered.
Yeah, I would agree with that 100%. It's like that band that shows up and has that great debut album. And then the second album, there's some good songs. There's some good songs, but a little uneven. And you're hoping that third album is the comeback album. And you're like, okay, I see what they were trying to do. And although I did enjoy it, but it felt like it was a bit all over the place. And I think that's how I feel about season 3. It was a little bit messy throughout with some of the storylines and some of the beats that they were going through. They didn't flesh out enough of the stuff that they presented or teased that they were going to be fleshing out in this third season. And I think that not ruined, but I think it undercut, as you said earlier, undercut some of the big emotional moments that you were leading to with these storylines that I thought did a disservice in the end to the show. I love the performances. I did enjoy the back half, and the finale for the most part I liked. And it left me with that feeling like, you know what? We could bash this show through normal criticisms and all this kind of stuff, but it's such an anomaly of a show that I think it stayed true to what it was, even when it stumbled and was messy and was maybe lost its way at times. It still stayed true to putting that energy out there of positivity and hope, and that the belief that we can work together, we can solve things together, talk to people from different walks of life, find commonality, find a universal understanding with each other, that I think is a positive. And so, yeah, overall, it's not going to be considered one of the greatest shows or greatest comedies ever made, I don't think. But I think it will be considered a unicorn of a show in a world where these shows rarely happen. It worked for a lot of people. And I think a lot of people's anger or upset or disappointment about the show is because they wanted more of that. They wanted more of the show to succeed so they could enjoy it and they could talk about it and they could relish in the overall accomplishments of the show. And unfortunately, it didn't 100% get there. Even this season, it didn't 100% get there. But we'll always have that first season as a great, great example of what a show like this can actually be. And
a victim of its own success.
Yeah, victim of its own success. 100%. Great point, Shannon. All right, well, there you go. That's our spoiler review here for the back half of season 3 of Ted Lasso and our overall thoughts on season 3 of Ted Lasso. We hope you enjoyed it. Please remember to subscribe to the channel down below and hit that bell button. Leave a comment. What are your thoughts about everything Shannon and I discussed? Did we miss anything? Did we hit anything? What are your thoughts on everything we brought up here? Your thoughts on season 3 and on the series overall? Shannon, another fun review. Thanks for joining me, brother, on this. Please let people know where they can find you.
Yeah, you can follow me at Shannon_McClung because we're on Ted Lasso. It's not Lord Shannon. Here it's just Shannon. On Twitter at Shannon. Yes. That was only for Succession. On Twitter at Shannon_McClung. On Instagram at Shannon the Geek Buddy. And you can see me every week with this gentleman to my right and a gentleman. Oh, I wish I had a picture of Vogel. I could have picked up with Mike Vogel every week on the Geek Buddies.
There you go. All right. Thank you all so much. You can follow me at The Rocha Says on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok, but you all know that. You all take care of yourselves. Be well. Hopefully we'll see a Ted Lasso spinoff down the road. We'll cover it if it does. But if not, it's been an interesting 3 seasons for sure. Overall good, I think. And we'll talk to you next time with another brand new review here on the Outlaw Nation. Peace. Until then, take care.